This isn't just like another Me Too issue anymore. It's way bigger than that. What we're dealing with here is corporate corruption.
Unlike many other industries, there's no economic incentive, there's no consumer pressure that is going to be applied because of the fan base behind these artists, which means that the music industry, when it comes to sexual violence, is way behind under other industries in terms of reforming. It's actually way behind Hollywood at this point.
Hello, welcome to Music Highlight Focus with me, Music Highlights editor Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we welcome Caroline Heldman, Ph.D., who's Executive Director of the Representation Project, and Sam Maloney, who's founder of the Punk Rock Therapist, amongst other things, and both of them together are co-founders of the Sound Off Coalition. And a content warning immediately here, this episode is going to discuss themes of sexual abuse. Now, earlier in the year, Music Highlight reported on a report launched by a group of 4 non-profit organizations in the USA, which called out, quote, the scathing history and financial impact of decades of sexual abuse and cover-ups in the music industry. The report, called Sound Off, Make the Music Industry Safe, was co-published by Lift Our Voices, the Female Composers Safety League, the Representation Project, and the Punk Rock Therapist. And amongst its key demands was a call for an end to the use of non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, that silence survivors. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The report catalogued in detail public information on reported sexual abuse, harassment, and related misconduct that it alleges took place by musicians and music industry executives, along with an accompanying note that since many of those allegations had not been tested in a court of law, they, quote, should be considered just allegations. And it also said that, quote, all individuals should be considered innocent until proven guilty. So whilst mostly comprised of allegations, the report is still a sobering document. It's over 200 pages detailing allegations against some of the most well-known names in the music business and music performers as well. So we invited Caroline and Samantha onto the podcast to talk about their work, to talk about the impact of that report, to talk about the way that they are using shareholder and political activism to try and make a difference, and about the scale of the challenge that they're taking on. I am very happy to welcome Caroline and Sam, co-founders of the Sound Off Coalition, to the podcast. Hello to the both of you.
Good morning.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Can you give us some basic introductions and context, who you both are, what you do, and how you're connected to, first of all, the Sound Off Coalition, but also this wider topic?
My name is Caroline Heldman. I wear a few different hats. I'm a professor of political science, and I've been involved in anti-sexual violence work since the early 90s. And I've recently teamed up with Sam. I have been working to pass legislation and laws, and I co-founded Stand With Survivors, which is an organization that shows up at high profile and lots of low profile trials as well to support survivors, because one of the things that we've discovered is being a public survivor is really terribly hard. You're just going to face a lot of trolling and death threats, and you'll also face intimidation in the courtroom. And so we show up, Stand With Survivors comes to courtrooms to make sure that both within the courtroom, while they're on the stand, while they're sitting in the galley, and outside the courtroom, that they know that other survivors have their back. And as the executive director of the Representation Project, which is a gender justice organization, we've used our research expertise and experience to team up with Sam over at the Punk Rock Therapist to form the Sound Off Coalition. And this is a coalition of survivor-led, mostly musician-led organizations that are fighting to make sure that the music industry is safe.
Great. Thank you. And Sam.
Hi. My name's Sam Maloney. I've been in the music industry for well over 30 years. I had my first record deal when I was still in high school. I'm a classically trained percussionist, but I'm known as a rock drummer, and I've played in some amazing bands such as Hole, Motley Crue, Eagles of Death Metal, Peaches, many, many others. And I wound up, after about 20 years of touring the world, I wanted to just kind of not be on the road anymore. So I wound up becoming a music manager. And then I was offered a job at Warner Brother Records where I became vice president of A&R. And it was like the best job in the world until it wasn't. So that's kind of what led me down this path of holy shit, what the hell is going on in the music industry? Like, I had never seen the amount of cover up that was inside those walls of the label and other labels. And so I was basically forced out of the label, handed an NDA, signed it, and then it just opened up an entirely new world that I've been, working with survivors ever since. This business is rife with sexual predators, and it's time for a change. It can't work like this anymore.
Before we move on to the report that you just released, can we? I mean, you've put it pretty succinctly there. Can we expand on that nutshell a little bit? You're saying that the industry is rife with sexual predators. What's the scale of the problem? What what is that landscape like for women in the music industry today?
Well, this isn't just like another Me Too issue anymore. It's way bigger than that. What we're dealing with here is corporate corruption. And these labels have known of the artists that they're signing that they're sexually abusive to women and children, and they turn a blind eye and they continue to work with them, and they would find reports of women being assaulted and they just hand over NDAs or just intimidate, like Caroline has said. And and also there's a lot of men in the industry that are actually like pedophiles, and it's insane to me. So we we decided to have the top research firm in DC write a report. We had nothing to do with this report. We just asked them to write this report, and it came back a year later, and it's shocking. And this report was not for the music industry; it was for music fans and for everyone else to just be educated to know what exactly is going on here.
You published this report. It's linked below the podcast. We've published it as a news story on musically.com as well. It's an enormously large number and a depressingly large number of very well-known men, almost all men, performers and executives in the music industry, and it details extensively their alleged abuse and also sometimes it's convicted abuse. Tell us more about the report, why you did it, what it contains, and what the impact has been so far.
The Sound Off report documents 7 decades of sexual violence and cover-up in the industry. And as much as it's a focus on sexual violence, it's actually much more a focus on industry corruption, an industry that operates on silencing survivors through NDAs, through payouts, in order to maintain artists in the industry who make them a lot of money, who may be raping children or women or engaging in other acts of sexual violence. So what we found is that it wasn't just an issue with one artist or one label. It is across the board. It's systemic. It's a culture. And artists who come into this culture very quickly learn what they can get away with and what will happen if you make the label money. And so I think, a really obvious example is R. Kelly, who, when he, after his allegations and later convictions, his record sales actually end up shooting up. So the incentive system in the industry is actually set up for corruption, right? It encourages this sort of corruption. And so if you read the report, you're going to find that some of your favorite artists are listed in the report with evidence of sexual violence. And it's heartbreaking because we can come to this as music fans. And as musicians, I'm a longtime musician, classically trained, and in recent years have been parlaying my operatic training into heavy metal arias, if you will. And I've, experienced this firsthand in different rooms I've been in. Sam has experienced this, but almost every woman who interacts with the music industry has experienced this to a greater or lesser extent because it's in the water, right? It's baked into the culture of the music industry. And it goes all the way up to the highest levels where you see an incredible amount of money and resources being applied to attorneys and NDAs in order to cover it up. So it's the abuse is systemic, but more importantly, for our purposes of shifting the industry, the cover up is systemic.
What I'd like to talk about as a focus here is this covering up, this culture of, as you put it, issuing NDAs, signing money over, and moving the problem away in that sense, or at least that's the ambition. And you're saying it's systemic. The quote I've got taken here from the report is that for decades the music industry has condoned, perpetuated, and often marketed a culture of sexual abuse of women and underage girls. Thousands of artists, executives, and shareholders have made billions of dollars in profit while engaging in and or covering up criminal sexual behavior. And when you put it in those words, that is a shocking thing to consider, isn't it? That it is the success of the industry relies on this behavior that you've mentioned. So can we talk about this pattern of covering up by the big companies in the music industry? Can you just explain how that process works for someone who perhaps just can't imagine how this works?
Well, we could talk about, say there's a woman, say there's an executive at a high level in an industry in a label, and she reports multiple um, issues of sexual abuse that she has been told of by artists. Like literally, what if a woman came in, a big artist, and said, "This other A&R guy tried to rape me," and then that label person would go, the executive would go to her bosses and say, hey, we have a problem here. And then other women say, he did this to me, he did that, we got a problem. What happens? The woman that says there's a problem, she's pushed out of the label, loses her job, and the guy gets promoted. That's literally, in a nutshell, what happens. Whether it's women at the highest levels of executive positions of power or the assistant or the intern, they treat women like second class citizens. They objectify us. It's there's such misogyny in this industry that is so baked in, like Caroline said, that it's so hard to change, because these CEOs are also part of the problem. Why are they in the music industry? Because they couldn't actually become artists, right? So they still want to be in the music industry. And they think that that gives them carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to do. Put their hands on women, sexually abuse, sexually assault. And nothing is done except they push the women out. Keep promoting the men.
That's, again, shocking. The simple question there is why? The simple to say question. There's a complex answer there. Why, when a woman in a position of authority in a major global company, when she goes to, I don't know, a boss or someone senior and says, hey, there's multiple women are reporting that this person is sexually assaulting them, why does it work the way you've described and not the way that we would hope it would work, where an investigation would be launched onto this person and there would be a full understanding of what is really going on and justice?
I think because the music industry has made this claim of it's all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's like it's all about the music, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll should not be the moniker for what we are operating under. That gives them the ability to say, well, they knew what they were getting into. It's like, no. How many women have been pushed out of the industry as artists because they've been sexually assaulted and abused by the executives at the label? How many? We don't know. How many Taylor Swifts would we have had there not been countless women being abused in the industry? We don't know.
This might be a difficult thing to put a number on. I'm not expecting a specific number, but well, how many? I mean, like how you mentioned before that all women in the music industry experience this at some point, which is dreadful. But what kind of what's the critical mass here? How often is this happening, and where it's something that is really bad and then being covered up in this way?
We know that in Hollywood, we had the casting couch for 100 years, and all of a sudden that's no longer acceptable. And you pull back the curtain on the casting couch, and you see that this problem is rampant and it's baked in. That's what's happening with the music industry, and it's the same incentives, right? It's assumptions about male marketability and bankability that are driving this, where men's artistry simply matters more. And we've known for a very long time that men's artistry has mattered more. It's taken a lot to get women included in the industry. And mostly it's arguments of profitability. And of course, you have the Taylor Swifts and the Beyoncés who are just breaking the mold. And you look at this and you say, wait a minute, why haven't we been including women in the same way and in the industry as we've been including men? So the sort of value of men more in the industry is longstanding. It's kind of like Hollywood. Everyone has a story. So the question that you're asking, Joe, about when they come forward and when it's covered up, that's a little more complicated, because if you're smart and you're a woman in the industry and you're smart about your career, frankly, you're not going to come forward. And so very few women do come forward. And the few who do, almost universally in our conversations with just dozens and dozens of women who have come forward, the retaliation is always the same. So we can't get a handle on the scope of the problem because it's so widespread. But what we can say is the small number of women who've come forward against especially prominent musicians, who Sam has worked with most of them, or we have at least had some connection to them. Their experience, what Sam just described, might sound like it's very specific, but it's actually universal. You come forward and then you're retaliated against in some way, and then maybe they throw a bone at you, but you're definitely signing an NDA before you leave the industry, before you're pushed out. But at the end of the day, most women actually never come forward because it's just such a common practice and experience in the industry that it's normalized.
So they're not coming forward because it's a combination of either fear of the repercussions, they see what happens to other women who do come forward, or it's so normal that they think, well, if I come forward, what difference would it make?
I have an issue with someone as big as, say, Lady Gaga. Say there's a Lady Gaga out there in the world who has such a massive platform, and say she has said she has been sexually assaulted by a music producer. Oh, yet she doesn't actually name him. And it's, how can a woman of that stature not be able to name her abuser that still works in the music industry? What is it going to take? These men have known for years about the problems that have been going on, and they've done nothing but embrace these artists, embrace these managers and executives. Come on in. Let's give. There are people that have, my friends work at labels, and they'll say, holy shit, Sam, I just had a marketing meeting where the label head is so excited to go to the county jail and pick their artist up because they know that, like, let's make sure, let's get them back in the studio. It's like, what is going on here? They're incentivized to give platforms to these men who are abusive. Why?
Well, why?
Because it's a boys club and they're protecting themselves at all levels. I've spoken to dozens of survivors of a pedophile. He is hired by an international company. He's a radio DJ. Even when a credible Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee um, names him as her abuser when she was 15, no one cares. This radio station still has him on the payroll. Dozens of women have come forward. The radio station doesn't care. these companies say, we're not going to do anything until these guys are actually prosecuted. And that is the problem. And Caroline and I know that this is such a big problem because most of these guys will never be prosecuted.
This pattern of covering up, it extends to a sort of blanket ignoring in a sense as well. What should the industry response be?
That the music industry that is absolutely a boys' club that is amplifying patriarchy has gone unchecked. Our report covers 70 years. It's gone unchecked the entire time, and there is, unlike many other industries, there's no economic incentive. There's no consumer pressure that is going to be applied because of the fan base behind these artists. Which means that the music industry, when it comes to sexual violence, is way behind under other industries in terms of reforming. It's actually way behind Hollywood at this point. It's like the Luddite, the 1950s boys club, and we are applying different forms of pressure in order to shift that. But I'll say it's tougher than other industries because they've been operating like the Wild West, as though basic employment laws simply don't apply to them.
Well, you've brought me onto a question I was going to ask you, which is why has the Me Too wave not hit the music industry like it has other creative industries? You've answered that to an extent there, and that makes sense. But there's those other. It felt like in those other industries there was a sort of surge of well, that's why it's called the Me Too movement, right? There was a sort of a surge of momentum of change. Why not in the music industry?
Because it's so hard to get into the music industry to begin with. So once the door is open for us women, it's an honor to be a part of this industry, to be able to record an album, be able to work with these artists, it's and then when something happens to you, all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're out. You're out. Like, wait, this just happened to me. Like, why is this? Why do I have to get kicked out of the club now? And so, I mean, these CEOs, they have golden parachutes of hundreds of millions of dollars in stock options that they just cash out after they've been accused of multiple issues of sexual assault, harassment, and abuse, and they get paid out hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you think the shareholders would like to know that? I don't think so. If the CEO of Ford Motor Company had credible accusations of rape and sexual assault, the stock would drop for days and they would kick him out immediately. Instead, they don't do anything but keep these guys in power because it is a boys club. And again, the perverse economic incentives, we need to change this. Like R. Kelly has like 5 million like listeners on Spotify or whatever. He's 5 million streams. It's like every month people are listening to R. Kelly. They should start diverting that income directly to the survivors. These catalogs are not going to be worth much of anything anymore if people start realizing, you know what, this catalog that we paid $200 million for the publishing, actually these guys were abusing women for years. People aren't going to want to listen to that music anymore. The consumers have the ability to say, you know what, I don't want to buy the rock band's t-shirt in Target anymore. So this is just about us giving the public an education on what's really been going on. The music industry has been sexually assaulting women for decades, and it's time that somebody does something about it. Caroline and I have been working with legislators to open up windows to allow these stories to even become public. The only reason why there's been sort of a Me Too wave happening in New York and California is because women like Caroline and myself and others who talked to legislators testified to pass bills that gave these women the ability to actually hold their abusers accountable. And like, just because you have the ability to do that doesn't mean that these women are actually going to do it. They say to me, Sam, you know what? I'd rather stay in the music industry instead of speaking out, because I will ruin my chances of ever working in this business again. And that's just the reality.
Do you think the new generation of people moving into the music industry are going to be able to facilitate some change here. We often hear that, this is very broad brushstrokes, but we hear the Gen Z are a lot more open about discussing this kind of thing. They're more educated. They're more determined to support each other and bring these things out in the open. Do you think that is close to a reality? Is that going to affect the music industry?
So Gen Z is definitely more gender fluid than previous generations. Gen Z is also more dedicated to racial justice, but we've actually seen a troubling pattern that the popularity of the online manosphere, which is mostly podcasters and media content creators who are promoting rigid gender roles and restrictive masculinity, have actually made young men more sexist than their fathers on a number of measures. It's a troubling trend, and also they're diverging significantly from Gen Z women. So we're seeing this massive political and ideological gap forming, and so I have a lot of confidence that young women in general are just going to be pushing for this in ways that we haven't seen before, because they have been raised in a culture where they believe they're full human beings, and so when they run up against something like a boys' club in the music industry, it'll be distasteful, and it will be surprising and shocking. And I think that's my students go through this a lot. Their first few experiences of sexual harassment, where they realize they're thinking of themselves as an equal member at these tables, but they're not being seen as an equal member. Young men, I am concerned, and I know I'm painting a broad brush here. We're moving in the wrong direction, right? And we also have Me Too fatigue. Social movements, they do two big things. The first kind of element or push is to raise awareness, which the Me Too movement did, and then the second piece that's so vital for an effective movement is instituting mechanisms of accountability to address the issue. And the Me Too movement actually didn't do that. Did a great job of raising awareness. It's globally pretty much died down in terms of people talking about it and writing about it and thinking about it. Activism is still very strong, but the public kind of footprint is almost gone. We're approaching this with new tools and a new way, with a focus on accountability, because you know what, folks know about the problem in general in society. We're educating them about the music industry. I doubt it. I bet people read this report and they're surprised about who, but they're not surprised it's happening. But yeah, we have a tough road in front of us, because this is an industry that's been doing this for so long with impunity, that I don't think they realize what's coming, but they probably are, little head patting, I would imagine, about our coalition. But for sure, we're going to be bringing tools they haven't seen before.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned accountability there. Let's talk about that. You've mentioned how hard it is to, on an individual level, to stand up in these circumstances, and how hard it is to, I can imagine, to face the might of a major company's legal department in these situations. So and of course, the people that are being targeted are individuals. So it's why it's so important to have this support network. But that's kind of a problem, isn't it? So how do you then challenge the status quo? How do you bring accountability to these giant businesses when you've got, essentially all these cases of abuse happening to individuals and then them being covered up?
What's the best way to move forward? And right now, it's just to hit them in their pockets financially. We need to say to the shareholders, do you know what you've been profiting off of for years? Like, are you okay with these artists and executives abusing women? Like, there needs to be, we need to hit them in their pockets. They need to start realizing they cannot put their money in these labels anymore, because these assets that the music companies own are going to be useless in 5 to 10 years. These catalogs that they keep that keep sustaining these labels might be worth nothing when people find out actually what's been going on.
You're talking about shareholder activism, where
Yeah.
you or a group of people purchase shares in a specific company, and then they can raise these issues at shareholder meetings, and they have to be put on the record and discussed, or at least acknowledged by the board of these companies, right?
Yeah, and we know that that's been done. Dorothy Carvello's, been trying to do that, but we're just going to go around the labels and go straight to the Senate leadership in the states and ask them to open up investigations into these companies.
So you're going straight down the political route of
Yeah, yeah.
We are.
you're going to present this evidence and say it's a systemic problem. And how does that work politically in the US to get them to look into these things?
We are pushing for the Senate to investigate the cover up, the corruption in the industry. And what the Senate can do is just expose them, right? They can bring the CEOs of these big companies before them and interrogate them, grill them as to why this cover up has been happening and what they plan to do to change that. So we are pushing for Senate hearings, we're pushing for shareholder activism, we're pushing for consumer activism, and we're also pushing for litigation. So lots of cases coming forward rather than just one or two at a time with women who've experienced similar things. So we're doing a full court press, the likes of which they haven't seen before. And we're hoping that, really what this is about is it's about Wall Street, right? It's about hitting them where they actually hurt and listen, which would be the pocketbook.
Talking of money, this sounds like an expensive process. So, and you're talking about a situation where people can't talk about it, perhaps because of NDAs, so they can't sort of support you like that. So how do you find it difficult to raise the money to make this happen? Or how is that working?
That's a good question. We're just running on ramen and faith and a lot of work. But some people outside the industry have taken notice of what Caroline and I and many other women have been doing for the last few years, and they also see that this is a problem, and they want to help us fix it.
I've linked to this report below the podcast, and if you read it, you will definitely find one of your favorite, at least one, multiple of your favorite and the most famous artists in there with the allegations detailed.
For the most part, most of these serial abusers are the same guys, and they just over and over and over and over again keep on abusing women. And what happens to these women? They're traumatized for years. Sometimes it takes people 30, 40, 50 years to actually come forward about the abuse. And so my partner, Christina Cerati, and I started the Punk Rock Therapist as a nonprofit organization to provide free therapy to victims of sexual assault in the music industry. And let me tell you, we are inundated with women all across the world who have been abused by label execs, artists, promoters, security guards for these guys. It's a never ending story. And if someone just said, you know what, we don't want to work with this person anymore, at least we would know that the labels are no longer giving these guys a platform. They are spending millions of dollars on these artists to get to market them. And it's like, why don't you spend your money somewhere else? There's other artists that don't serially rape and abuse women. You could put your money elsewhere instead of into some of these problematic men.
Why are they not at least paying lip service to this and putting money in the direction of what you just said? I mean, I know that sounds cynical, but I mean, there's so much money in the music industry at the moment. Why not?
Because that would acknowledge that there's a problem. There's a systemic problem of sexual abuse of women in the music industry, and they don't want to acknowledge that. They rather paint these women as victims. Oh, it's a one-time thing. Oh, what was she wearing? Everything is about what happened. What was a victim doing there? What? They just turn it around. Darvo,
Yeah. Let's look ahead a bit, or at least in terms of trying to build towards the future. We've got a lot of listeners who are perhaps thinking, well, I want to be part of the better tomorrow. I want to be part of the change. We've already discussed how difficult it is to do that in some ways, but not impossible. So what can people do, men or women in the music industry listening, what can they do to be part of a positive change to support a better future music industry?
I think there are a lot of things folks can do. One would be to consider that there's so much great creativity in the world. So when you go to the grocery store, you're probably buying cage free eggs. How about you also buy rape free music? Not that hard. And put your money toward, artists maybe who are survivors, who are public about it. So also, boycott. So spend your money in ways that encourage survivors to come forward. Use your money to vote for the industry that you want. Also, if you're in the music industry, and I know a lot of folks listening in this podcast are, be the ally, be the person who is supportive when someone comes forward, believe them, and respect their wishes. If they want to report, they don't want to report. If you see something, say something. I mean, it's really kind of that simple too. If you're on an awards committee, look at the backgrounds of the folks who are being nominated and use sexual violence as a variable that would exclude them from your vote. Like, don't and speak up about it. Say, why are we going to be awarding someone who has been accused of being a pedophile multiple times? Like, it shouldn't be that difficult to consider sexual violence as something that excludes somebody from getting an award.
I just want the public to be aware of what's been going on for a long time, and then they can make a decision as to what music they want to listen to. But if they don't know that their favorite artist has been raping women and children, once they know that, then they get to decide, do I still want to listen to this artist? Do I still want to put money in their pocket? Do I still want to buy that t-shirt, buy the ticket when they come into town? I don't know. For me, I'd rather spend my money on something else. Like I'd rather go to a concert feeling good about, this is what I got into the music industry for. I mean, to be part of something that's really powerful. Art is like an incredible way to express yourself. But when these labels are signing artists that are like literally saying that they're sleeping with 13-year-old girls, like, and singing about it, like when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them, right? So I just want to educate the public. They can decide what they want to do.
I will link to the Representation Project, the Sound of Coalition. I'll link to the report and Sam, the punk rock therapist. Is that
PunkrockTherapist.org. Joe, I have one question before we wrap up.
Of course.
I'm just curious, as a man in this industry, what do you think? How do you think we change this?
I mean, it's a combination of everything you said. I think internally in the industry, it has to be people feeling empowered that they can, if they be allies to the people who this is happening to. If they see it happening, they have to not feel fear. That's a very complicated mesh of individual platforms to allow that to happen. I'm on the back foot here. I'm not usually asked questions on the podcast. I wonder if it will take one very, very big artist to stand up and point the finger, which has kind of happened, but not perhaps the very, very biggest, highest level.
But what about the men? Where are the men in this conversation? What huge male artists will say, you know what? I don't want to be on this label anymore because they've been harboring all these predators. Like, where is that man? Where's the man that's going to stand up for all of the women? Because most of the men aren't problematic.
The whole industry is driven around stars, at whatever level you're talking about, in a niche or at a global level. If they stand up and make a stand, fans follow that, don't they? They more than ever, people respect authenticity. They respect clarity, transparency, and the feeling of truth.
I also have another question about this report. There's a list of artists and executives. When you saw it, was there anyone that really you were shocked by, or have you now turned off some of the artists' music on your playlists?
There were no names that shocked me. I'd heard about the majority of the people in the accusations. There were some that surprised me, and some that also there's some very famous names on there on the star side, and I'd sort of known about it and also just let it go. I sort of thought, oh well, that's they lived this life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that's what they did, and I'd sort of minimized it in my head, I think,
Right.
and continue to enjoy their music. Being reminded of it, it does make me think differently. I there are artists here who I think, well, that does set the context for hearing them, and it doesn't feel good.
I do want to, yeah. Thank you for sharing.
It would be more challenging if it was my favorite artist. If one of my very, very favorite artists was on there, I would find that very challenging.
And who
are your favorites?
Yeah, I'm curious. Who are your favorite musicians and artists?
I don't doubt that the favorite artists I have that are men have credible accusations against them. I don't doubt that. So, if honestly, if I dug deep enough, I could probably find them. And so I think as a fan, I probably exist in denial in a sense.
Yeah.
It's very complicated, and and in a sense, well, it's about self accountability as well, isn't it? At an individual level, and that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because music is nostalgia and emotion and connection to our past, and it's really heart wrenching. Some of these artists,
you can't not think about it when you listen to it, but you might be able to minimize it over time. But I think it puts fans in a very complicated situation. I don't mean that sympathetically. I mean it makes them face up to a reality, and maybe that is the beginning of a change, pushing from the bottom of the pyramid.
Something that Caroline and I experienced recently was we were at an event, and there was a survivor that was of the music industry. She was brutally raped by one of the biggest rock stars in the world, and he's got multiple allegations. But we were talking to her, and she was saying, like, I can't get away from it. The music is everywhere. It's in the elevator. It's at the car wash. It's at the restaurant, right? So, like, just imagine being that victim, and you can't walk through life without one of his songs being played anywhere at any time. And I swear to God, as she was telling us this, we were having this conversation, the fucking song started, and we were like, I can't believe this. Here we are. It's just so. I just want the listeners to just think about the victims for once. Think about what they've been through. And
I used to be one of these people who could separate the art from the artist. And as a huge music lover, that was important because there's so many allegations, right, against some of my favorite artists. But then when I started doing work with survivors in the industry intensely, it is now impossible to listen to songs without thinking about how the survivors I've worked with would feel if they were there. And I imagine it from their position. You can't help but do that. The more you work with survivors of the music industry or any industry, but the more you work with survivors from the music industry, you realize like they are hearing this all over the place. It's, especially if it's a major artist. And every time that comes up, for many of them, it's triggering them, right? It's taking them back to the moment of rape, sexual violence. And so when I'm listening to a song, I can't separate it from thinking about what it would feel like for the survivor to be right there with me, being re-traumatized.
From a fan perspective, that's a highly challenging thing, isn't it? Because it's essentially saying, okay, these songs bring you joy, right? That's why you like them. But they're also, now the context has changed. You know what the context is. The context is this. And at the center of it is this abuse, and it's terrible, and it's had this real tangible effect. And the thought process behind that is saying, well, okay, and it's time to let go of those songs now. It's time to say, okay, the songs have had their time in your life, and now they've changed. They're discolored because of this, and you have to put them aside now. And they're your favorite artists, and I guess what we're talking about is a recontextualization of a very large tranche of our, at least Western cultural catalogue.
it's hard for me. I'm a music lover. I'm a drummer. I want to listen to these songs. I want to go back to that time where I enjoyed it and I didn't know, I had blinders on, or we didn't know at the time. But now we know. So now I get to decide, what do I want to do? And yeah, it's hard, but it's not that hard for me because I only have so much time in the day to listen to music. So I get to decide what I want to listen to and what brings me joy, instead of listening to an artist and being like, oh God, you know what he did to, this person and that person,
And there's a lot of music out there. That's the one good thing about music. There's a
yeah,
huge amount of it. You can always find another favorite song.
yeah.
Caroline, Sam, thank you ever so much. Okay, that's it. And thank you again to Sam and Caroline. And there are, as I mentioned at the end, there are lots of links beneath the podcast to the projects they're working on, the report in question, some contextual news stories on a couple of the artists that they mentioned, and a bunch of other resources as well. Now, if you did find that useful, please do share the podcast on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. And if you want to get in touch with me, of course, I would love to hear from you. You can email me on Joe, @musically.com. Music Ally also has a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces of the best analysis, news, marketing insight, and skills from across Music Ally's wide range of sources. So sign up and impress your friends. That's it. Thank you for listening. I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time, farewell.